Hi, I'm Mary Jo. In this video, you will learn the pointed petal technique and see the variations created by size and by color as if you were painting with ribbon. And we'll talk about those sneaky techniques I utilize that help me do better work. Okay, let's talk about the tools you will use. For hand sewing, use a size 10 milliner's needle. It is the perfect needle for this type of work. If you will add some ribbon embroidery to your piece, you'll want to use size 22 chenille needles. You will also need hand sewing threads and possibly beading thread in matching or neutral shades, along with a thread conditioner or beeswax. 2 sizes of fabric scissors come in handy, as does a needle nose pliers now and then. I use a circle template on occasion to help with size control and a small ruler. I generally always have a pencil handy. I will use applique pins when pinning is required, and finally you may need sizing or spray starch to add body to the wider silk ribbons. On occasion, the ribbon actually has more than enough body. These 2 graphics show petal layer variations and ribbon amounts needed for the 13mm or 32mm dahlias. For the 13mm dahlia, each petal needs about 1.5 inches. For the 32mm, about 3 inches each. So just do the math to determine how much ribbon you will need. Let's talk about the basic process for making one fold. Here is the 13mm ribbon and here is the 32mm ribbon. Once sewn, the petals will be these sizes. Let's fold one petal. Take the ribbon, which already has a diagonal cut, and fold it forward at an angle. We are in the process of forming an equilateral triangle. Now fold the ribbon to the back diagonally. Adjust ribbon so sides do form that triangle and the tip remains pointed. Sometimes the tip caves in a bit, and that's not our goal, at least for this technique. Pin ribbon to keep folds in place. Fold the top layer over, revealing the ribbon selvage edge, and trim away the excess ribbon, allowing for about a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Turn petal over to trim from the other side with a matching seam allowance. If you are making one petal, it's ready to be stitched. We are making more than one petal. Notice the diagonally trimmed ribbon is ready for the next petal, so there is little waste incurred. The 13mm ribbon is folded in the exact same manner. It is just a more narrow ribbon to work with. Fold forward, fold to the back, pinch the tip, pin, trim, and after sewn, the petal will be this size, quite little. Before starting to fold petals, I will determine if the ribbon needs a little bit of sizing, and if so, the ribbon is lightly sprayed with the sizing, then ironed dry. The ribbon will become just a tad crispy. Now let's start by making a 2-layered dahlia from 13mm ribbon. The bottom layer has 15 petals, the top 11. My 15 petals are ready to be sewn, but let's recap the folding process. Notice the ribbon has an angled cut, and we'll utilize that cut to help with ribbon waste. Fold the ribbon to the front, fold to the back, adjust, pinch the tip, pin, and trim off the excess ribbon, always trimming on the diagonal. Let's make a couple more. Thread your milliner's size 10 needle with doubled hand sewing thread and run it through the thread conditioner. Trim thread ends flush. Don't knot the thread ends though. Take any petal. Fold the top layer back a little to reveal where the ribbon selvage edge is. Slip needle into the revealed fold, then take 3 tiny whip stitches in place. Trim away the thread ends. Fold the top layer back in place. Gather stitch across the petal, catching in the hidden selvage edge in the process. Stitches can be quite small as the ribbon is lightweight. Make certain to catch the very edge of the ribbon at each side of the folds, as this will help each petal behave nicely for the next few steps. Grab another petal, fold the top layer back for a second to reveal the selvage, then gather stitch across, again making certain to catch the beginning and ending edges of the petal. Repeat this process until all 15 petals have been chain gather stitched together. When all petals have been chained together, pull thread to gather the petals. Now adjust each one so they are all facing in the same direction. Sometimes the first petal gets a bit twisted, so just be aware of that. Pull thread again so that this layer of the petals measures 2 inches. Hold the length, then secure with 3 whip stitches in place. Remember, this measurement is an arbitrary number that results in a certain finished size. This is one key to ribbon work. It involves guesswork and a little experimenting. Adjust the gathers a bit, then trim the seam allowance down to about 1/8 of an inch. A really sharp scissors is great for this task. Turn petals over to the opposite side and trim seam allowance a little from those petals that have become a bit unruly. Fold petals over again to the right side. Fold in half with right sides facing, aligning the seam line. Stitch the first petal to the last petal at the seam line with 3 tiny whip stitches in place. Open out the petal layer and adjust the gathers. I use a little bit of non-woven interfacing as a foundation to build the flowers onto, both for ribbon work and sometimes for ribbon embroidery. This is Pellon's midweight non-woven sew-in interfacing. Just a small square will do the trick. By building the flowers onto the interfacing, each flower becomes very stable and entirely movable. With the needle that is still attached to the petal layer, stitch directly into the interfacing. Pin a few petals here and there just to keep things in place. Using a back stitch, sew the seam allowance to the interfacing. This process not only secures the petal layer to the interfacing but also taps the seam allowance down. Stitch all around the petals close to the seam line and continue to adjust the gathers as you go so that the petals are close to evenly spaced. Secure the thread on the back side with several stitches in place and then trim the thread away. The next step is to chain gather stitch the top petal layer. Before we get started, notice the flower we are making is different than the finished one shown, and this is the best part of our hand-dyed silk ribbons. The ribbon shades all work so great together, and there is such freedom in color choice and so much variety. Anyway, chain gather stitch the 11 petals together for the top layer in the same manner as was done for the bottom. This petal layer is gathered down to 1 1/2 inches. Secure the thread, trim down the seam allowance, and join the first petal to the last. Now sew this layer of petals directly into the interfacing and onto the bottom petal layer. Then sew the seam allowance in place, just as was done before. We're going to add sequins and beads to the flower center now, but another option would be to embroider the center or add any other embellishment of choice, including filling the center with more petals. For this task, you can use beading thread. Often, I will just use the threaded needle I've been using, and we're going to use 5 and 4 millimeter sequins and sizes 11 and 15 seed beads. Now bring the threaded needle to the flower center, slip a sequin onto the needle and then a seed bead. Slide the sequin down to meet the flower surface, then stitch around the seed bead and back through the sequin hole and to the flower underside. Pull the thread snug. Now just repeat this process using the sequins and beads kind of randomly without thinking about it too much until you have a fully filled center. Secure the thread on the underside with 3 whip stitches in place. Now, carefully trim away the excess interfacing so that it does not show from the right side of the flower. Voila! Now, what if you would like to make a 5-layered dahlia? Well, let's do that. Just keep in mind this all boils down to a little math. Geometry, really. To start, trace a 1 1/4 inch circle onto a piece of interfacing. This circle is a guideline to help keep your flower shapely. This is the bottom petal layer and it has 21 petals. These petals were gathered down to 3 3/4 inches. The process now is identical to assembling this 5-layered flower as the 2-layered flower, and the only difference is the amount of petals used for each layer, the quantity of layers you'll make, and how you will embellish the flower center. Now start adding the other petal layers to the bottom layer. Layer number 4 has 15 petals. Layer number 3 has 11. Layer number 2 has 9 petals. And layer number 1 has 7. To fill the center fully, you will need another 3 petals. This blue dahlia center is filled with 3 additional petals. The peacock and the red dahlia is filled with a few ribbon embroidery stitches, which is what I'll do for this vibrant pink and orange dahlia. Thread a small amount of 3.5 millimeter silk ribbon into a size 22 chenille needle. Lock on by piercing ribbon about 1/4 inch from short end, then pull on the long tail. Form a soft knot at the ribbon end by folding end over on itself about 1/4 inch. Pierce through both layers of the fold, then slide the fold down the ribbon. Stitch ribbon into interfacing and grab those needle nose pliers. Now stitch up through the flower center and use those needle nose pliers to help. Form a small loop with the ribbon about a 1/8 of an inch deep on the double. Stitch through the ribbon at the base of the loop and through the flower center. Use those needle nose to help. Pull the ribbon through gently until you have 2 little loops in the center. Secure the ribbon on flower underside, then trim off the ribbon. And trim away the excess interfacing. I want to show you a few examples of usage for the pointed petal technique. These are some of our flower therapy kits. The dahlia, or pointed petal, is just one of the techniques to explore with these kits. Maybe you'd like to create this flower using silk organza. Well, silk organza happens to be one of my most favorite fabrics, and we dye that too. What if this technique were used to make some flamingos? Flamingos is one of our Ribbon Muse kits. We really wanted to try something different, so I used ribbon scraps in shades of green, blues, and whites, and the 32mm and 13mm ribbons to make a wave. I painted with the ribbon. So going back to our original shape, this wave has been created from singles and multiples of both 13mm and 32mm pointed petals. Here are the ribbon amounts needed to make different variations of the pointed petal technique. We certainly encourage you to explore ribbon and color and fabric in combinations that really inspire you. Come and visit us too at MaryJoHineyDesigns.com.